Jiminy Crickets.
Jiminy Cricket is the name. I'm a happy-go-lucky fellow, always getting in wrong for singing my song. A merry old soul am I. Jiminy Cricket is the name. I'll be hanging around this evening. I'll be tipping my hat and telling you that Jiminy Cricket is the name.
Crick, 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 crick.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our final Dateline Jiminy Crickets of 2022 for November 2022. And I'm here with Ruthie. Hello, Ruthie.
Hello, Chris. Hello, Cricketeers.
And we have a lot of things planned for this episode, including, unfortunately, another memorial segment. But following that, we have some fun things planned that are all sort of related to nighttime entertainment in the Disney parks, which is kind of fitting because one of the people that we're memorializing today was heavily involved in the nighttime entertainment at Disney parks. So we didn't plan that, it just sort of coincidentally happened. So are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so before that, we have a very special announcement. Dateline Jiminy Crickets proudly endorses Concierge Vacation Planners, a Disney-authorized specialty vacation planning service. Concierge doesn't just book your trip, they walk you through the entire process, helping you plan out every detail, one-on-one, to make the very most out of your vacation while saving you both time and money. And the best part is, they charge nothing for their services. You will get the exact same pricing as if you booked your vacation directly through Disney. But in using Concierge expertise, you've got the added bonus of having your very own personal Disney Guru planner by your side. Both Ruthie and I are also satisfied customers, and we just can't recommend them enough. Visit their website at www.concierge.com. That's www.concierge.com, as in mouse ears. So when you book your next Disney vacation, be it Walt Disney World, Disneyland, the Disney Cruise Line, or many of the other Disney destinations available worldwide, contact Concierge Vacation Planners, and be sure to tell them Disney Chris sent you. So, as we do far too often, when we lose performers, entertainers, people in the entertainment industry that have an affiliation with the Walt Disney Company, we like to pay honor to them and tribute them and appreciate the time that we did have with them. And we have several people, some of which you might not know, but you do know their work, and other people that you definitely know. So Ruthie and I are going to talk about them. Ruthie did an outline, so she'll do most of the talking, and I'll chime in. And we have several, unfortunately, to talk about. It's been a while since we've done this, so who is at the top of our list? We're doing them in the order in which they passed away. And we go all the way back to July. That's how long it's been since we've done this. So.
Yeah, the first person that we lost is actor David Warner, and he passed back in July 24th of this year, and he was 80 years old. And he was born July 29th, 1941 in Manchester, England. And he had a prolific career that spans more than 50 years. You know, he did horror movies, Oscar winners. He provided his voice in animated series and also did a couple of Disney things that we're going to mention here. And we're not going to list all of everything that he's done in that 50-year span of his career, but we're going to hit some of the highlights that you might recognize him from. So he actually began his career on stage after studying at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. He starred in several productions with the Royal Shakespeare Company, appearing as the title roles in Richard II and Hamlet. And he also appeared in the 1968 film adaptation of A Midsummer's Night Dream alongside Helen Mirren, Judi Dench, and Diana Rigg. And although, he kind of became known as a Shakespearean actor, for films, he was often cast as the antagonist. And some examples of that are in Disney's landmark film, which you see an image here, Tron. He played the power-hungry executive who passed off Jeff Bridges' ideas as his own. And then also you might recognize him in Titanic. He conspired with Billy Zane's character to keep the central lovebirds apart, and his character's name was Spicer Lovejoy. Also in the film Time Bandits, he literally played the role of evil, or the devil. That was his character in that film.
I remember that one.
Yeah, I haven't seen that, so I don't know. But in The Omen, he actually wasn't the villain. This time he was the victim, and he portrayed the photographer threatened by the demonic child Damien.
It wasn't just a jaw-dropping performance. It was an entire head that dropped. If you've seen that, you know what I'm talking about.
I have not.
I won't get into any of the other gruesome details.
Yeah. He also appeared in 3 of director Sam Peckinpah's films, including the World War II ensemble film Cross of Iron.
Oh, yeah! I've never heard of it.
When he wasn't playing a antagonist, here's one of his examples of him not playing the antagonist. He played Bob Cratchit in the TV movie of A Christmas Carol opposite George C. Scott, who played Scrooge.
Which is
so
a
that's
very
a pretty
well-known
famous version of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is.
He acted in 2 Star Trek films, including one appearance as a Klingon, so you probably wouldn't recognize his face in that, since he probably had makeup and stuff on. In 1981, he won an Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Miniseries or Special for his portrayal of the barbaric commander of a Roman legion in the television miniseries Masada. And then this next one I kind of threw in because this is one of my favorites, but he had a small recurring role on the TV series Twin Peaks as Thomas Eckert in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
As we mentioned before, he lent his voice to animated productions such as Batman the Animated Series. He played Ra's al Ghul, and also The Amazing World of Gumball,
which I've never heard of. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, it's like a Cartoon Network show.
Okay.
Yeah. He also provided the voice of the narrator in the 1997 direct-to-video Disney animated movie Pooh's Grand Adventure: The Search for Christopher Robin.
So filling in for Sebastian Cabot.
Mm-hmm. And then in his last film role, he played eccentric military veteran Admiral Boom, who regularly fired cannons to mark the time in Mary Poppins Returns.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that, but that's a definite... That's a Disney... strong Disney tie-in.
Yeah.
Legendary tie-in.
Yeah, I think everybody remembers him for Tron, but yeah, I mean, this is definitely that he reprised, or he is not reprising that. The role is being reprised.
Yeah.
And he is the one playing Admiral Boom.
Right.
So that's David Warner.
Okay. Who's next?
The next person that we're going to talk about is Tony Dow. And of course, you guys definitely recognize his face. He didn't have much of a Disney connection, but he did have one thing, so we just wanted to run through his career here a little bit.
He definitely had a lot of friendships with people within Disney, because he was he knew, what's his name? He knew all the teenage actors from the 50s, like Annette and all them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So actor Tony Dow passed away on July 27th of this year, and he was 77. He was born in Los Angeles, California on April 13th, 1945. And of course, his most notable thing is he portrayed Wally Cleaver in the iconic television sitcom Leave It to Beaver from 1957 to 1963. And Wally was the all-American boy, an intelligent, polite teenager, trusted by his parents, popular with his peers, and liked by his teachers. And in the show's later years, Dow grew into an attractive, athletic young man and was often featured in heartthrob-type magazines aimed principally at teenage girls. So, he started off, I think he was 12 when he
Tiger
started.
Beat.
Yeah. So in 1957,
existed.
he was 12, and so he basically grew, his whole teenage years were on screen, so of course he's growing up in front of everybody. After Leave It to Beaver, he appeared on other television shows such as My Three Sons, Dr. Kildare, The Greatest Show on Earth, Never Too Young, and Mr. Novak. And from 1965 to 1968, he served in the U.S. National Guard, which interrupted his acting career. But he returned to acting and continued to guest star on television series such as Adam 12, Love American Style, Knight Rider, Square Pegs, The Mod Squad, The Hardy Boys, and Emergency.
Okay.
During the 70s, he continued acting while also working in the construction industry and studying journalism and filmmaking. And in 1977, he parodied his role as Wally from Leave It to Beaver in the Kentucky Fried Movie with Jerry Zucker playing Beaver. So it wasn't Jerry Mathers who returned up in that.
Yeah.
So here's his Disney connection. From 1983 to 1989, he reprised his role as Wally Cleaver in a reunion television movie and subsequent sequel series, The New Leave It to Beaver, which originally aired on the Disney Channel from 1984 to 1985.
And this one did have the full original cast. It had
other than
Jerry Mathers, the father, not only
passed.
because he was no longer alive, but Barbara Billingsley was in it.
Yep.
The actor that played the bad kid, what was his name? You remember the bad?
Yeah.
I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it's left my mind.
Eddie Haskell.
Yes, there you go.
He was on it, yeah.
Yeah.
They were all grown up and had their own kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then from 1986 to 1989, this was picked up by TBS and it aired there, so it stopped being run on the Disney Channel.
But it was still produced by Walt Disney Television.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Tony Dow actually wrote an episode of the show in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
In 1987, he was honored by the Young Artist Foundation with its former Child Star Lifetime Achievement Award for his role as Wally Cleaver.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1989, he made his debut as a director with an episode of The New Lassie, a TV show. And then he also directed episodes of other TV shows such as Get a Life, Harry and the Hendersons, Coach, Babylon 5, Crusade, and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And
varying levels of quality. And
right. And subject matter there, too.
Yeah. Like, some of those are, like, very good things, and others are like,
Yeah. Yes. He also served as visual effects supervisor for Babylon 5. And then in 1996, he provided visual effects for the Fox television movie Doctor Who.
Was this an American take on the...
I think so.
Okay.
Since it says Fox television.
Right.
Yeah. And then just a few more things. He co-produced The Adventures of Captain Zoom in Outer Space in 1995, and It Came from Outer Space 2 in 1996. And then
Is that
in addition
was that part 2 of Zoom in Outer Space, or part 2 of something that was called It Came from Outer Space that
I don't
was
know.
not related? It's confusing.
Yeah. So in addition to acting, directing, producing, and writing, he was a sculptor creating abstract bronze sculptures.
Okay.
So that is Tony
So
Dow.
the next one hit both Ruthie and I really hard because this was part of both of our childhoods. I mean, like, we grew up with this person.
Yeah. So the next person is Olivia Newton-John. She passed away on August 8th, and she was 73. Again, that's too young. She was actually born in Cambridge, England on September 26, 1948, so she was not born in Australia.
Yeah,
But
I didn't know that.
yeah, she moved with her family to Melbourne, Australia when she was 5. So after winning a talent contest on a TV show, which is called Sing Sing Sing, as a teen, she formed an all-girl group and she began appearing on weekly pop music programs in Australia. She recorded her first single in England in 1966 and scored a few international hits, but she remained largely unknown to U.S. audiences until 1973, when Let Me Be There became a top 10 hit on both the adult contemporary and the country charts.
I'm not familiar with that song at all. I'm not sure, and it's probably because it's country, and I'm not as familiar with classic country.
Yeah, I definitely am not. So, so after that, she had a series of #1 easy listening hits, including "I Honestly Love You," "Have You Never Been Mellow," and "Please, Mr. Please."
So I know the first two. Ruthie knows "I Honestly Love You." I know "I Honestly Love You" and "Have You Never Been Mellow," but both of us do not remember "Please, Mr. Please." We probably would know it if we heard it, but...
Yeah. But what she's gonna forever be known for in our hearts and in our lives as Sandy in the musical Grease, which was 1978's top grossing movie and became an enduring cultural phenomenon, which still remains that way today.
But now there's nowhere to hide. I love that.
Yes. So this movie actually gave her an opportunity to change her squeaky clean image, and the cover
Which is
of her
ironic
next album,
because
what was that?
for like 7/8 of the movie she is squeaky clean. It's just the last scene.
The end, yeah.
Yeah.
But that's all that matters, because
Yeah.
the end you see her in a leather jacket.
Yeah. Skin tight. It's not leather, but it's like a shiny material trousers.
Yes.
She said she had to be sewn into them.
Oh gosh, yikes.
Yeah.
All right, so the cover of her next album, it was called Totally Hot, and it featured her in black leather. Yeah. And her songs were more edgy and more contemporary pop sound, so not so much easy listening anymore.
Right.
And then in 1981, she took her new persona to a next level with the song Physical. Also, I think the album is called Physical.
Yeah, and it was all over the radio. I
Yeah.
remember. And it was when MTV had just sort of launched, and it was on MTV every 5 minutes. I remember the video. I mean, it's a very iconic video. It's got like those, it looks like a grid pattern for the background, and that really became an 80s kind of a thing, that look of that, like, grid pattern. She kind of started that with this video.
Yeah. But one thing about this song is it had some suggestive lyrics.
Yes.
Which actually got it banned on several radio stations.
Yeah.
But it was also her biggest hit, and it spent 10 weeks atop the Billboard Top 100 chart.
I know.
So, a couple of other things that she did. She also appeared in several more big budget movies, including the musical fantasy Xanadu, with Hollywood legend Gene Kelly in his final screen role. The film bombed, but its soundtrack sold well and spawned the song Magic as an
I love ELO. I mean, I love all their music, so. But this is a movie that I think was too far ahead of its time. If had it come out maybe 8 years later, it would have done well. Yeah. But I really like it. I enjoy Xanadu. I think it's a good movie. It has a few things that are weird, but overall, I think it's a good movie.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
So over her lengthy career, she won 4 Grammy Awards and sold more than 100 million albums. And her one Disney role was as Amy Miller in the 1990 made-for-television Christmas fantasy comedy film, A Mom for Christmas, which aired on NBC.
Did she ever appear on The Muppet Show? I think she might have, which wasn't Disney at the time.
Yeah.
But... now it is. So.
And then you also said she performed a lot.
Oh, that's right. She performed live at Disneyland often during the 70s before she really hit it big as a live performer for, on the Tomorrowland stage and whatnot. Yeah.
All right, so she's definitely going to be missed.
Yes. So the next person is much, much more Disney involved.
Yes.
Than the
but
other
less
ones.
known.
But far less known.
Yes.
Yes, that's true.
Yes. All right, the next person is Ron Logan. And he is a Disney legend, and he was responsible for revolutionizing live entertainment for the Walt Disney Company. And he passed on August 30th, 2002, and he was 84.
Yeah.
So he was born in 1938 in Leavenworth, Kansas, and he studied trumpet, violin, piano, and dance.
All at the same time.
Yes, exactly. He was like Bert in the beginning of Mary
It's
Poppins.
like a one-man band. Yeah.
Yes. All right. He began performing professionally when he was in 9th grade and played in bands and orchestras nationwide. And he also performed as a trumpet player and singer on recordings, television, and films, as well as appearing live with name bands and lounge acts throughout the United States.
And that was a big deal at that time because this was sort of the golden age of all that. The late 50s. That's when Sinatra and Tony Bennett and all them were doing that. So that's a big deal.
He graduated from UCLA, earning a BA and an MA degrees in music and music education. This is my alma mater there. So, and it was also during this time that he began his career at Disneyland as a trumpet player. And he had many opportunities to meet Walt Disney in person while he was playing trumpet there at Disneyland. He also performed with the fanfare trumpets as part of the Disney-produced pageantry for the 1960 Winter Olympics in Olympic Valley, also known as Squaw Valley, California. And then from 1965 to 1978, he was the director of bands and jazz studies at Long Beach City College in Long Beach, California.
Okay. I'm glad you clarified.
Yes.
Where
in
it
case
is.
you might not know where Long Beach City College is located.
Right.
Yes. All right. In 1978, he moved to Florida and became Walt Disney World's music director. Then he returned back to Disneyland in 1980 as Parks Director of Entertainment. And then in 1982, he went back to Walt Disney World as Vice President of Entertainment. And then in 1987, he was promoted to Vice President of Creative Show Development for all of Walt Disney attractions.
So when you hear our final segment tonight and pay attention to the years, those coincide with important things going on in what we're going to talk about. Like 1980 was a major year for Disney Live Entertainment, and to move back to Disney World in 82, right before another major grand opening, that sort of says something about what he was involved in.
Yeah.
We'll get to that later.
Yes. In his last role at Disney, Ron was Executive Vice President, Executive Producer for Walt Disney Entertainment, where he was responsible for creating, casting, and producing all live entertainment products. So he picked up the baton from previous entertainment directors at Disney Parks, and under his leadership, the park's entertainment offerings became true spectacles. They were spectacular spectacles. All right, so some of the things he was involved in include...
But are not limited to.
Right. He was instrumental in the productions of Fantasmic at Disneyland in 1992 and at Disney Hollywood Studios in 1998. Indiana Jones Epic Stunt Spectacular at Disney's Hollywood Studios in 1989. One of a huge favorite of a lot of people, Festival of the Lion King at Animal Kingdom Theme Park in 1998. Buffalo Bill's Wild West Show at Disneyland Paris in 1992, and many more, but those are probably the highlights, the ones that people remember the most. He was also executive vice president of the Walt Disney Special Events Group and executive vice president of Disney Special Programs Inc. And he produced live entertainment shows for Disney parks worldwide, as well as 5 Super Bowl halftime shows. And he also authored a book entitled Walt Disney Entertainment: A Respective Look. It's a written resource documenting the evolution of Walt Disney Entertainment from 1955 through 2000.
Now, I've never heard of that book, but boy, would I love to have that.
Yeah,
That's
I
right
feel
up my
like
alley.
it's not readily available.
Yeah.
Yeah, so building on the success of live theme park stage shows, Ron and his team pitched the idea of a Beauty and the Beast Broadway show to leadership, and the same team that produced the Beauty and the Beast stage show at Disneyland helped to create the Broadway version. So this led to the establishment of Walt Disney Theatrical Productions, where Ron served as president for the early years of Disney on Broadway. So really, he was very instrumental in any of the Disney Broadway shows that, he started it all. So if you're going to go see any Disney show on Broadway, it started with him. Although he retired from Walt Disney Company in 2001, he continued to pursue activities in music and theater around the world. And after his retirement, he was honored with a window on Main Street, USA at Walt Disney World Resort's Magic Kingdom Park. The window is for Main Street Music Company, with words below the title reading, Ron Logan, leading the band into a new century. And then he was named a Disney legend in 2007.
Okay, so the next two we have to mention them because out of all of them, they're probably the most important as far as their Disney ties. But we're actually, because of that, we're going to really do an in-depth coverage of both of these women in a future episode. So we're just going to lightly brush over. We're not going to go into as much detail because we will be going into even more detail in a future episode. And so we're keeping this brief, but that's not because they're less important or anything. It's quite the opposite. So
exactly. We're just going to hit the highlights here.
Right.
And then we'll really dig deep later.
Yeah, just like we did for Betty White and then we did for Pat Carroll, we'll do the same thing for these two women. So
yeah.
All
right, so the first one is Angela Lansbury. And we lost her on October 11th, 2002, and she was 96. So she's probably best known, to audiences, to general audiences, as Jessica Fletcher in the long-running detective series Murder, She Wrote. But she also has 2 classic Disney performances that have endeared her to audiences across generations and across, different media types. So when she came to the Disney Company, she was already an accomplished Oscar-nominated dramatic actress and a Tony Award-winning stage star. But her first appearance with Disney was as the apprentice witch Eglantine Price in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, 1971. Which is kind of
Traguna, Macoides, Tracorum, Satisti. Nothing happened.
It's kind of crazy that she only started working with Disney in 1971.
Yeah.
You would have thought that she would have worked earlier with Disney, but... And then after that, she returned 2 decades later to voice Mrs. Potts, of course, the enchanted teapot in the animated classic Beauty and the Beast, 1991. She went on to voice Mrs. Potts in Beauty and the Beast, The Enchanted Christmas, 1997, as well as in the video game Kingdom Hearts 2 that came out in 2006. She later served as a segment host for the studio's millennial animated classic Fantasia 2000, which came out in 1999, and she introduced Stravinsky's Firebird Suite and narrated. So that's for Fantasia 2000, the Stravinsky's Firebird Suite.
Yes.
And then she also she narrated Beauty and the Beast sing-along for the attraction at Epcot. But her final Disney performance was in Mary Poppins Returns in 2018, portraying the unnamed balloon lady who facilitates the magic of the movie's final scene and leads off the musical number Nowhere to Go But Up.
Mm-hmm.
And then she was named a Disney legend in 1995.
So another Disney legend, not only a Disney legend, but she was married to a Disney legend. She's a double Disney legend.
Yes. The next person that we lost just recently is Alice Davis, and this is a big one for me.
Oh yeah, I was just devastated when I heard. Yeah.
Of course, the same for Angela Lansbury, but just being a Disney fan, Alice Davis is, part of, when you think of these Disney Imagineers, you think of
one
her.
of those last connections to Walt.
To Walt, yeah.
There's fewer and farther between as time goes on.
Yeah. So, artist and costume designer Alice Davis passed away on November 3rd, 2002 at the age of 93. And she was one of the original people hired at Walt Disney Imagineering, then known as WED Enterprises, early on.
Mm-hmm.
Before her career at Disney, she attended
I call it nepotism.
Yeah, okay.
No, it really isn't, because although she was married to Mark Davis, who was an amazing artist in his own right, that does not diminish her talents whatsoever.
Right. Before
she was equally as deserving. So.
Yeah. She attended Chouinard Art Institute, where she met her future husband, Disney animator Mark Davis, who was an instructor there.
Yes.
And her first assignment for Disney was designing a costume created for actress Helene Stanley to wear for some live-action reference footage being filmed to help inspire Mark's animation for the lead actor Briar Rose in Sleeping Beauty.
So do you remember the first episode of the Disneyland TV series where they're kind of going around the studio showing different things happening before we see Walt? Mm-hmm. And one of the things they show is the artists sketching Sleeping Beauty, dancing around. That's the costume that she designed. Yeah.
With the apron.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, the animation of Briar Rose was inspired by her costume as well.
Right.
So what you see in the film is inspired by Alice. Mm-hmm. And then that job led Alice to design costumes for Disney's live-action motion picture Toby Tyler. She and Mark married in 1956, and she became an official Disney employee in 1962 when she joined WED Enterprises, like I mentioned before. And that led to her designing costumes for attractions such as It's a Small World, Pirates of the Caribbean, Carousel of Progress, and Flight to the Moon, just to name a few.
So she designed Dr. Tom Morrow's outfit.
Yeah. Paging Mr. Morrow.
Yeah.
In 2012, she was honored with a window on Main Street, USA at Disneyland, next to her husband's window. And Alice's window reads simply, Small World Costume Co., Alice Davis, Seamstress to the Stars. And then she was named a Disney legend in 2004.
Oh boy. Okay, so like I said, we're going to be covering Angela Lansbury and Alice Davis in much greater detail in a future episode. So please stay tuned for that. We just kind of covered the major hitting points.
Yeah.
Because we're really going to delve into them in a future podcast. So that
but we didn't want you guys to think that we forgot about
we didn't
them
want
either.
you to think that we weren't deeming them as important, because obviously they're very important. So we will now move on to happier things with our regular segment, the Disney Top 10. So, this episode we're going to be talking about Disney's top 10 theme park shows. Not just Disneyland, but It's really just Disneyland and Disney World that we are covering, but it was open for all parks, but it just so happens that those are the only 2 parks that made the list. Well, Epcot, all the parks in Disney World made the list, except for Animal Kingdom. And Disneyland, both parks in California made the list, but none of the overseas parks made the list. Sorry.
Probably mostly because we haven't seen the shows.
Yeah, that's probably has a lot to do with our bias anyway.
Yeah, so nothing against them.
No. So we're going to go through what we feel is the top 10 greatest nighttime shows of all time. This does not include like live performances of live musical acts. This is like permanent, ongoing production type shows, like parades and fireworks type shows. And this is our opinion, not yours. So if you don't agree, that's perfectly allowed. You don't have to, you're not supposed to. If you do, great. But this is Ruthie and I came together and reached a consensus, and this is how if we did this individually, we might number it differently, but
yeah,
as a team, this is what we decided would be the the music stopped for a second. That's all right. It started again. Was shocked that we did it as a team. Couldn't believe it. The music just stunned for a second.
I know, right?
They came together and did something as a team? Okay.
What? Yeah.
So, anyways, we're just going to go through what we feel is the top 10 greatest. And if you disagree, just leave your opinion in the notes. We'd love to hear what you have to say on the matter. We would really encourage that, so please do if you don't agree. But you don't have to agree. This is just how we feel. So, the first one is probably the most recent one on our list. I'm looking at the list. I think it is. It's definitely the most recent. And this is the Paint the Night Parade, which opened in Disneyland just a few years ago. Like, what was it?
2016 or something like that?
I think it was part of the 65th anniversary. So yeah. Because that really didn't kick off till late 2015. So yeah, I think it was 2016. And it was only there for one summer, and then it ran in DCA the next summer, I think. And then it hasn't run since. And it started in Hong Kong, and then they moved it to California and added a new scene to it and kind of made it even better than the original version, and made the music English translated. But yeah, so this was sort of the long anticipated follow-up to the Main Street Electrical Parade, because the first time they attempted to follow it up was not successful, and that's not on our list either. Which was Paint the Night. So this was the first real nighttime show following Paint the Night, which was way back in 97.
No, not Paint the Night. This is Paint the Night.
I mean, Light Magic.
Yeah.
Which was way back in 97. So it was years, almost a decade, without a live nighttime show. And it seems like the same thing's going to happen again at this point.
I know, right?
So what's the next one, Ruthie? This one you have not seen. I
right.
know.
The next one is Sorcery in the Sky, which I think you said was at Hollywood Studios.
Yes. Can't you tell by the picture?
Yes. But I have not seen it, and I don't know anything about it.
Well, I'll tell you about it. So this was the Chinese theater sort of served as the castle, with the fireworks being set off behind it. They actually had to close the studio tour during it because the fallout was right where the studio tour went through. So, but they had a giant inflatable sorcerer Mickey. Unlike the shows at the Magic Kingdom, though, it was all Hollywood music. So they played like all themes from famous Hollywood, not just Disney. But it ended with the Sorcerer's Apprentice to represent Fantasia, and that's when Mickey came up at the grand finale. The inflatable Mickey inflated from atop the theater, and they played the music from Sorcerer's Apprentice as the finale. But it also included like the Star Wars theme and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Gone with the Wind and Over the Rainbow and all sorts of classic Hollywood, Singing in the Rain, all all the classic Hollywood songs. So it was less about Disney than the one in the Magic Kingdom. So that's how they differentiated it. And it was a very good one. I enjoyed it. I saw it quite a few times because it was still going when I worked at the studio. So I was working there when it was happening. So the next one is also from Florida, this time at the Magic Kingdom, and this was their follow-up to the Main Street Electrical Parade, which was far more successful. And this predated Light Magic, and people were actually looking to this show as what they were expecting from Disney when Light Magic opened. And when it was nowhere nearly as good as this, that was part of the problem, because they automatically were going to compare it to this, which was Disney World's follow-up, which was an amazing parade. And it definitely was as great as the Electrical Parade, but they plussed it. And it was a very well loved. And I was working there too when I was working at the Magic Kingdom when this parade was happening. In fact, I was on Main Street one of the summers that this ran, I think in '96, and this was their nighttime parade, and I had to kind of do crowd control during it, so I saw it many, many times, and it was a fantastic parade.
Yeah, I haven't seen this one.
It's definitely it's a lot like the Electrical Parade, but it's not a synthesizer music. It was all like orchestrated music, and it had a theme song. It had a Fantasia segment with a giant Chernabog that was, his wings were closed and he looked like a mountain, and then he'd open his wings and it would be Chernabog on the mountain, all lit up in lights. It was really, really well done. So it was an amazing show. That's why I wanted it higher up on the list, even though Ruthie had never seen it.
Yeah.
So what's the next one, Ruthie?
The next one is Wishes, which is a Walt Disney World fireworks show, which another one that I have not seen.
Now this one I haven't seen either, but because of its reputation, I definitely knew that it should be on the list, because this was the follow-up in Florida to Disneyland's Remember Dreams Come True, where they took all the things they had learned from that fireworks show and incorporated it into a Disney World show. And it was hosted by Jiminy Cricket, and it was really well loved and quite well. People were really sad when it ended. Yeah.
It was there a long time too.
Yeah, it was. And the song is kind of, people still remember the theme song, and yeah, so that was kind of a big deal. So the next one Ruthie has seen, but I have not seen. So I'll let you talk about this one, even though we're going back and forth.
Yes, that's fine, because you can talk about the next one, because I haven't seen that one.
Right.
Okay, so this one is World of Color at DCA. This is, kind of like your Phantasmic for DCA, but it's definitely it's
or
different.
Illuminations and Phantasmic morphed together.
It's definitely different than both of those shows, and I think it's similar because it uses water and they project water on there, but they're really playing a lot with like different colors, hence the name World of Color. And they have a lot of projection, like just when it comes to like water shooting up in the sky and it changing colors and things like that. I also really like how they start the show off with the world is a carousel of color song from the Disneyland TV show,
The Wonderful World of Color.
Right. I love
by
that
the Sherman
callback there,
Brothers. Mm-hmm.
how they do that, and it is really fun. I like how they utilize, as you can see in this picture, the Ferris wheel behind it as part of it. So you have that Disney icon behind this show, and I think it's definitely worth seeing. And I know they've been working on, they've gone through different iterations. They had a Christmas one. I think they did actually have a Halloween one. Not recently, but in the past, and then they've had an upgraded version from the original, and then I think they announced at D23 they're going to do like a World of Color 1, which is another new version of the show. So it's here to stay, and I think that's really great that DCA
right
has
behind
something like this.
it is Ruthie's favorite all-time attraction.
No. There's actually 2 attractions back there that I do not like.
Yeah.
So, but yes, but I like World of Color. It gives you those Disney feels.
So the next one is Epcot Center's Illuminations, all the different iterations of it. I've seen, now to be quite honest, I have only sat through and watched it one time. And it was when it was, I think it's before it was called Illuminations. It was before it became that. And we got like a seat right at the front where you're facing the American Adventure from the other side of the water. Mm-hmm. And we had to sit there for like 3 hours to get that spot.
Wow.
And we still couldn't see it all. Because it was really... It doesn't really matter where you watch it from, because it kind of takes place all over the whole... Like, we sat there and waited, and we didn't need to. Because we still couldn't see everything. It's so spread out. But I would be there when it was happening.
Yeah.
When I worked there in Disney World and whatnot. But I would never stop to watch it. I'd use it as an opportunity to go on the rides when they were less crowded. I wasn't like interested in dealing with the crowds and trying to see it. I was like, I didn't need to see it, but I appreciate why it was so popular, and
and it's very beloved.
So the next one Ruthie has seen, but I have not seen, so I'll let her talk about the next one. And this was the one that sort of restarted the whole idea of fireworks in the Disney parks.
This one I actually would probably put as my number 1 in my own personal list, and this is Remember Dreams Come True, the fireworks show at Disneyland for the 50th anniversary. I actually saw it on the day that they debuted it, which was May 5th, 2005, because I was there at Disneyland for that day. When they did the dedication, and it blew me away. And the thing that I love about this fireworks show is that this was before projection, so there was not anything to see on the castle, like they do now. This is a true fireworks show in the way that you think of when it comes to Disney fireworks, and this is what I love most about it. And they really encapsulated the attractions at Disneyland, really celebrating the 50th anniversary with this show. It is beyond excellent, beyond like anything that you can think of, and being there in the middle, in the in the hub there, being and just having all of these fireworks surround you, it was just amazing experience. I saw it multiple times because I loved it so much, and I'm not really a big fireworks show like person, but this one, this blew me away. This gave me all the Disney feels. It was so amazing to see it. That I wish they would bring it back. I love it.
So, the first time they used computer synchronized fireworks was this show. Before that, they had someone standing back there, like counting.
Wow.
Okay, 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, trying to synchronize manually. This is the first time they actually had it all programmed And they didn't require someone to light the fireworks. It was all done computer robotically. So that's another milestone with the show.
Yeah.
Now that's how they do all of them. So,
Mm-hmm.
so the next one we've both seen.
Many times.
Again, I think I probably sat and watched it twice in all the times I've been there when it was happening. Because again, I wasn't that interested. I used it as an opportunity to go on the rides when they weren't as crowded. Generally, I would not even be in Frontierland. I'd be in the other side of the park, which was dead
Right.
during this.
Trying
and,
to avoid people.
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because when I was younger, my goal was to go on as many rides as possible, and I wasn't as into shows, so that was my thing.
But this, you didn't say, this is Phantasmic.
Oh yeah, this is Phantasmic. And our main topic tonight is actually all about Phantasmic, so I'm not going to go into much detail here.
Right.
But our number 2 is... what, Ruthie?
The Main Street Electrical Parade, of course. This has definitely been brought to the park and taken away and moved to Walt Disney World and taken away and then brought back to Disneyland. They add things, they keep saying final performance, but they don't. It's not going to be the final performance because this is one of the most beloved shows that they've ever created for a nighttime show at Disney parks because people love it. And I'm really kind of annoyed that I wasn't able to see the most latest iteration. They stopped it before I was going to Disneyland because I really wanted to see the new float that they made. Yeah. The Small World float. Yeah. And with all of the different trains and different representation of different characters and things like that. But I mean, this is classic Disney right here. You think of this parade. And you say nighttime parade, this is what people think of. So, of course, this has to be, high on our list.
Right. So our number 1, and I had to fight for this, but I explained my thinking, and Ruthie decided to let me have it. And that is the original Disney nighttime show, going all the way back to 1957, Fantasy in the Sky. And the reason I wanted to pick it as number 1 is not because it's the most spectacular, or biggest, or most impressive, but because it's the first, and it really is the iconic thing that we think of when we think of Disneyland. Disneyland with the castle, with the fireworks, with Tinkerbell flying over it, it all came out of this. The opening to the Disney television program was this, Even before it existed, it was the opening for the Disneyland TV show. Before Fantasy in the Sky became a thing, opened with animation of fireworks over the castle with Tinkerbell, and that was what inspired the real thing to happen. It's funny that it wasn't the other way around.
Right. Yeah.
But so I feel like this is the most iconic show of all time, nighttime show, and also it's the granddaddy of all the other fireworks shows, and from time to time they'll bring it back. So I think they brought it back fairly recently for a limited time because it's very easy to put on. It's not that complicated, so if they need a placeholder, this is a good go-to. So now we're going to move on to our main topic. Are you ready?
Yes, let's go.
Get the Encyclopedia, Encyclopedia. Encyclopedia. If you want to know the answers, here's the way. Just look inside this book and you will see everything from A clear down through Z in the Encyclopedia, Encyclopedia.
When darkness and light collide, the night becomes fantastic. Presenting the ultimate battle of good and evil on Disneyland's Rivers of America. It's fantasy. It's frightening. Be there when the night ignites. Fantasmic, new at Disneyland.
So, our encyclopedia topic, of course, is Fantasmic. We had planned this months ago, but when I got into all the research, it became kind of really more than we had planned. And we didn't have time. The first time we planned to do it, there was no way that we were going to have enough time to do it. So we just didn't do it. We skipped it. But we kept all of the images that I made and the outline and decided we'd do it for a future episode. So we're doing it now. And the reason we didn't have that many segments tonight, again, is because this is a really deep dive where I went a little overboard on the research. So it became kind of I created a monster.
Yeah.
And so this is gonna be kind of the total history of Fantasmic from its origins till the present day. In fact, I had to add some to the outline because of it just opening in Florida a few weeks ago. So that's how long ago we had originally planned on doing this. It hadn't yet opened in Florida, so I had to update things and add a few more pictures to it. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning of stage shows that were held on the Rivers of America, which brings us all the way back to 1960. And the first nighttime event ever to be held on the Rivers of America was called Dixieland in Disneyland, which was a Dixieland jazz concert, live concert with multiple bands. And it was a special ticketed, they closed the park and those with the special tickets were let in. And it was a one price includes all. First time they ever did this. So not only did you get to see the show, but you got to go on all the attractions without using tickets. So this was really the first time Disney ever attempted that system. And it's what led to, eventually, decades later, the unlimited passport, because it's basically the same system. And then they started doing this all-inclusive thing for the ticketing for all their nighttime events going forward. So by the time they made it a permanent thing in the 80s, they had plenty of practice with it. But that being said, this original, premiere performance of Dixieland and Disneyland, it was held one night only. It wasn't an ongoing show. It was one special night, special event. And all of the acts were on watercraft on the river, either on the big boats, or they even did the people on the keel boats or on the canoes and the Tom Sawyer Island rafts. But they also added they created some special barges too, the special floats, literally floats, for the event that were not used otherwise. So, and then it ended with fireworks. So that was the first year. In the second year, it was pretty much the same thing, but they added a huge headline act, and he would be returning not for every year, but several future years. So in 1961, when they did it, they had Louis Armstrong as their headliner. And again, it was just, and now it was a two-night event. And going forward, it was done 2 nights, consecutive nights. But that was it. It wasn't an ongoing thing. So basically the same thing, watercraft. They created actually a special barge just for Louis Armstrong that looked like it had a crown on it because he was the king of New Orleans. And this picture's actually from Disneyland After Dark, the TV show, which was filmed at the same time, but not during the event. And so in the actual event, he was not on the Mark Twain. He was on a floating barge created just for him. And so this became an annual thing, and it would return every year, and every year it would be bigger and bigger, and it would grow and grow all throughout the 60s. And it was, so you can see the ticketings here, and see, originally it was just one night, then later you'd see it would be for 2 nights, and Louis Armstrong would be the special act, and it was, 1965 edition was 2 nights, the 24th and the 25th. Interesting, it was all right around my birthday, if I had been alive back then. So then it got really huge. By, I think, the 3rd year, it really grew into something even bigger, which is much more reminiscent of what Fantasmic would eventually turn into. This stage you're looking at was on the tip of Tom Sawyer Island. It was It was not a permanent thing. It was just put up for the event and then taken down after. And it was actually designed by Raleigh Crump. And this was called the Delta of the Rivers of America stage. And these, you see there's panels. There's like going across, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 panels. They would rotate. And behind them there was another scene. So they just rotated the panels around, and behind it was a different, this was the indoor ballroom. They had an outdoor street scene, like in New Orleans. So it was, and they had live dancers and a live jazz band, and this was the main part of the show. But also during the show, the barges and the boats would float by, and the band on stage would join in with them, and they would play together as the boats floated by. You can see the barge for Louis Armstrong in the top picture here with the crown on the top. You see that?
Yeah.
That's the one that Louis Armstrong was on. Actually, this says Al Hurt. So, but they originally created that for Louis Armstrong, but this was probably one of the years that he was not there. So Al Hurt, another famous Dixieland person, was probably the headliner that year. So he rode on the King float. But that was originally created. And then down under there you can see the keelboat. The Firehouse 5+2 is on top of that. So they would perform on the keelboat generally. So that's what that was. I know you've heard of Disneyland, Dixieland, Disneyland, and that's what that was. And also, they erected bleachers for a few of the years. It became so popular that they had to erect bleachers that were several stories high. And this was actually where New Orleans Square is now. But this was before they built New Orleans Square, and it was just a construction site. So they were able to build the bleachers over the construction site. You can see between the 2 sets of bleachers there's a wall. That was the wall, a wooden fence. That was the wall. Behind the wall is where New Orleans Square was being built. And the bleachers went right over the wall. And so you would sit in those bleachers and you could see the whole show from up there. And then they had ground level seating, all these folding chairs as well. That's how huge it became. It's kind of hard to believe that would become New Orleans Square. Eventually, the novelty wore off, and by the late 60s, the events continued on until 1973, but by 1969, I think, it ended up moving to Plaza Gardens, and it every year it kind of got, less and less, and then the last year was 1973. And it was just a Plaza Gardens thing. It didn't involve the river. It wasn't until 1980 that Disney would again decide to do a river show. And this was originally a way to get more people in the park during the summers. And they did kind of the same thing, less elaborate, but they did construct a temporary stage on the base of Tom Sawyer Island. And what they did is they would involve the watercraft, but this was no longer Dixieland. It was just pop music, really. But it would open and close with a performance by the Kids of the Kingdom that was themed to Frontierland in New Orleans. It kind of a river or frontier theme. Because back then Disney was much more concerned with keeping a cohesive theme, which I wish they still were now. So it had to somehow fit into the theme of Frontierland to be legitimately allowed to happen. But then after the Kids of the Kingdom would perform, every night they did it. It was generally just done one night a week on Saturday nights throughout the summer of 1980. But it really helped boost attendance. But after the Kids of the Kingdom performed, they would each night they would have a special A-level performing artist come out and perform a concert of 5 or 6 songs. And then after they were done, the Kids of the Kingdom would come back and do a closing number. So the meat of the show was different every week, but the opening and closing was always the same. And they had big name entertainment, like Tony Bennett and Pearl Bailey and things like that. I mean, big name for 1980. So, in the summer of 1980 and 81, when they did this, it only lasted 2 years. They also, during the grad night events, they'd have the grad night performers perform on stage, on the same stage on the other side of the river. So they had like big name pop stars, and it had no Frontier tie-in at all. It didn't have a Kids of the Kingdom opening. It was just a concert for grad night. And they had people like famous disco performers and things. You see this guy with gold pants and a pink jacket,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was happening during grad night. They figured, well, the stage is there, we might as well use it.
Mm-hmm.
So then the following year is when it got even bigger, and they started calling it the Roland River Review. And it was basically the same thing as it had been the year before, but they promoted it a lot more. One of the biggest stars to come in was Pearl Bailey. That was a big deal, heavily promoted. But they had lots of different musical acts. If you go to my website and go to the Disneyland After Dark chapter or the Disneyland Live Entertainment chapter, I have a bunch of the live performers that were featured on that page if you want to go check that out. As well as the Kids of the Kingdom opening number that's on there too. So that was 1981. The problem was that these were very expensive to put on. Even though it was bringing tons of people into the park, it was a really expensive because they didn't have to pay any extra. They just paid the regular daytime admission, and it was included. It was not an extra cost to see it. You just paid to get into Disneyland, and you stayed late to see it, and that was it. Just like Fantasmic is now. So, after 2 years, they said, we can't afford to keep doing this. But they wanted to still bring in the crowds. So, they decided, let's continue to do a river show, but let's try to do it without having a headliner, because the majority of the cost was paying the guest stars. And so, their thinking was, well, we'll have an initial investment to create and produce the show, but once it's created, it'll just be maintenance, and we won't have to be paying a big name to be in it. So that was sort of how the idea for what today is Fantasmic was sparked. And so there were a lot of earlier concepts that came around the year after the Roland River Review ended. And the first one, believe it or not, was going to be Haunted Mansion themed. This was one of the earliest concepts that never happened. And it was going to be called Disneyland's River Haunt, which sounds kind of cool. And they eventually did something kind of like this for their, I think it was for the 50th anniversary of the Haunted Mansion. They did something kind of similar to this, just as a one-off thing. I think it was definitely inspired by this. And what this was going to be is it was going to involve like all of the spooky things that can be considered spooky that were attractions around the rivers of America. Again, Disney was concerned with making sure everything had a Rivers of America theme at that point. They eventually let it go, but at this point they were trying to tie it into its surrounding area. So it would involve the Haunted Mansion, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Big Thunder Mountain as the themes that would be involved in the show. So it would not only have ghosts from the Haunted Mansion as part of it, which would include the grave, the caretaker, you know, the guy with the lantern in the graveyard, Madame Leota, and the ballroom ghosts. But it would also involve cowboy ghosts, you know, representing the Big Thunder. And then it would have the sailing ship Columbia would come in, and it would all be decorated as a ghost ship, which again was something that would come around to a later thing. But that would have the ghost pirates. So it was all about ghosts and things, but it was tied into Thunder Mountain, Pirates, and the Haunted Mansion. Well, that never happened, because right after that they came up with another idea they thought was easier, less involved, and this is where they finally started to turn away from the concept of trying to tie it into Frontierland specifically. And the original idea was what was going to be called Fantasia Live. So this is really, you can see where this definitely was an origin of Fantasmic, because some of these things made it into it. So, but the original idea, they didn't have the technology of water mist screening, you know, projecting onto water didn't exist. So the original idea was to construct 3 giant screens on the foot of Tom Sawyer Island and to play actual movie footage from Fantasia on these giant screens. And then in front of the screens, they would have a floating stage with a live orchestra playing the soundtrack for these scenes in Fantasia live. And then they would have fireworks and water and, you know. But the reason this never happened is because by this time, are you paying attention to the years? Remember we were talking earlier, 1980. Remember who was in charge during all this? So in 1982, all focus shifted to Florida because Epcot was opening. So all of the energy they had been putting on into opening a water show in Disneyland converted over to Florida, where they were now concentrating on creating an amazing type water show for Epcot Center instead. And it happened. In fact, only a few weeks after Epcot opened, its first water show premiered. And this was the great-grandfather of the water shows they do now, including Illuminations. This predated Illuminations. Originally, this was called Le Carnaval des Lumières, which is in French. I think it means the Carnival of Lights. And it opened in October of '82, just weeks after Epcot opened. And they used the large screen idea that they had originally thought of for Fantasia, live. But they nixed the live music idea. Instead, they created a score that was all synthesized music. And they played moving images on these screens, which were on giant barges in the middle of the ocean. There was no water projections or anything. The technology didn't exist yet. But they did have cascading waters with colored light, these giant screens. They had fireworks, and they had this amazing synthesizer score, which in '82, synthesized music was very, very new. So that was pretty impressive. So that was for the first summer. It lasted through the first summer. And then the following year, they updated it, and it was called A New World Fantasy, which opened in '83, which used the same score, but it just had updated technology. And then the year after, in '84, it was then changed to Laserphonic Fantasy, and they included laser projections for the first time. That's why they named it Laserphonic this time. They had laser projections coming from a barge, projecting very primitive laser effects on Spaceship Earth and whatnot. But all of these iterations used the same score, and the music was entirely used with synthesizer, So then in 19... here's another picture of the laser version. You see the lasers shooting out?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Those were really early laser technology. It's basically just a line. Is all the technology that they had at that point. So then in 1988 was the big year when it became what we know as Illuminations, which I think is such a clever name. So the original version of Illuminations premiered in 1988. And they added a lot of technology. They lit up they put lighting all around on all the various buildings around World Showcase. You can mostly see it in the Paris one, but they had like special light up things that would come out of the roofs. You see the one that says Moulin Rouge on the... They had those for each... You can't see them in the other pictures, but each pavilion had little things with limited animation on them that would move. And they redid the... now they had mists of water where they could project the lasers onto the mists of water. They couldn't do filmed images yet, but now they could project lasers onto the water mist. So that was a new development. And also they redid the score. And this is the first time where they nixed the synthesizer idea. And they went with a traditional orchestra. And this was a special theme song composed by Don Dorsey and Bruce Healey. And the Lagoon shows became so popular that the restaurants in Epcot were now being booked months in advance. That's how it was a huge cash cow. And who was around during this time? Do you know, Ruthie? Michael Eisner. And anything that was a big money generator, he raised an eyebrow to. So this really gave them the even stronger desire to go back to Disneyland and do it there. So now that they had Epcot all settled and under control. Now they wanted to go back to California and revisit their plans. So the first thing that they came up with for Disneyland was going to be for the 35th anniversary in 1990. And it was going to be part of their 35th anniversary celebration. Disney legend Barnett Ritchie, who was at that time heavily involved in the development of live shows in Disneyland, she was coming up with a concept for a special presentation in front of Sleeping Beauty Castle. This would involve the new mist screens with the lasers on the mist screens. And then it would use cascading waters and pyrotechnics. But at the last minute, as this was in development, Eisner canceled and said, because he wanted it to be bigger than the castle would allow. So he moved everything over to the Rivers of America yet again. So that was how it became Fantasmic. This is really when the ball started rolling on what we now know as Fantasmic. This is Barnett Ritchie, who we've talked about before because she passed away and she's a Disney legend, and we did a memorial on her a while back. So she was heavily involved in the production, and he gave Fantasmic, Michael Eisner, which at that time was being called Imagination. It was called the Imagination River Spectacle, otherwise known as Imagination. If you look at this concept art, you're seeing a lot of what we know as today as Fantasmic. But the show was given a deadline. It had to open by the early spring of 1992. Michael Eisner liked to give projects deadlines for whatever reason. And here are some of the early concepts for Imagination, and they're not that much different from what would become Fantasmic. In fact, it's virtually the same show. One of the main reasons the name change happened, and it was really a last-minute decision by Disney to change the name, is because they couldn't copyright the name Imagination. So they had to create an original name that didn't exist yet. So they created the name Fantasmic because it could be copywritten. And that's really it's kind of a letdown to know that that's where the name came from, but yes, it is. And that's why the title song, you hear them sing Imagination. They never mention Fantasmic in the song. It's the same song that was written for Imagination. They just used it and kept it the same. So there was a lot of prep work involved in getting the Rivers of America ready for its 1992 debut. So they had to first redo all of the landscaping and viewing areas along the Rivers of America. They gave it tiered levels with they paved with the landscaping and redid that whole area. They added the bridge to Pirates of the Caribbean. Didn't exist before any of this was being developed. And that was all in preparation for Imagination, later Fantasmic. And all the needed lighting and sound equipment that was designed for Fantasmic was going to be stored underground and robotically emerge from underground storage areas along the lake that could not be seen during the day, so as not to disturb the theming of Frontierland during the day. you can still see, like after dusk, all the lighting comes out from these these boxes that look like old-timey crates along the river. Very clever how they disguised everything. So for 20 months, that's almost 2 years, the rivers of America were drained, and all of the equipment for the show was installed on the bottom of the riverbed, and they were designed to emerge from the water under the show and to be hidden underwater during the day. So nothing would disturb the theming of Frontierland. So again, they were very concerned with the daytime not being messed up by what happens. They didn't care that the nighttime completely had nothing to do with the theming of Frontierland, but during the day they wanted to keep it Frontierland. So the other thing they did was they created the stage so that it blended into the Frontierland area. And this was actually built exactly where they had traditionally been building those temporary stages for all those past shows. The only difference is this was a permanent stage. So because it was permanent, it had to be designed to look like a 19th century frontier type building. So they did that, and they actually had to move the original Harper's Mill, which still exists. You can see it on the right of this picture, facing the other direction. Originally, that was facing right towards us, and the temporary stages they had built were in front of it. But now they moved it, they relocated it a little bit over so they could build the new stage permanently there, and they had more space to do it. So they also planned to have a fire-breathing dragon that would serve as the climax for the show. And originally, as you can see in these original models, from the get-go, they planned for the dragon to be a full-bodied, three-dimensional audio animatronic figure. But due to the lack of technology at that time, only the head was created. And then it was lifted on a giant crane that was designed to blend into the dragon look. They put like drapery over it so it looked like a dragon. It did breathe fire though, and the head was real looking. And you know what they used to get the fire to work without endangering the guests?
What did they use?
They discovered that Coffee Mate non-dairy creamer. If you lit that on fire, it was the perfect way to, and it had to be that brand. There's something that Coffee Mate has in their specific blending of their coffee creamer. So that's what they still use now for that, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, that
especially knowing that I put it in my coffee every morning. So the show was set to premiere in April of '92, and it was ready. It was ready to go. So earlier, the year before that, they created this giant inflatable Maleficent, and it toured cities around the country to promote the upcoming show in Disneyland. So they were really making a big deal. They would later reuse this for another later event, but originally it was created for that.
Yeah, the face on that is not cute.
No, it's kind of weird looking. And the crow on her arm looks like the proportions are a little odd. But anyway.
Yeah, definitely.
So the press was invited. The media was alerted. The new show was going to debut on April 29th, 1992. But this was a bad timing issue, which could not have been foreseen, because the day that this was supposed to premiere was the same date that the verdict came down on the Rodney King beating, the trial against the police officers involved in all of that nonsense. And due to the verdict being not guilty, riots erupted out all over Los Angeles, fires and whatnot. So Disney wisely decided that as a public relations move, they would delay the opening for several weeks. Also, originally, the slogan for Fantasmic was going to be there when the night ignites, which was very bad. It was a bad look for what was happening at the time. So they got rid of all that and changed it to something else wisely. Yeah. So if the show was ready to go on time, the only thing that delayed it was, current events.
Outside circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
So they decided on May 13th they would have it officially open instead. And Michael Eisner was there alongside Maleficent. And if you've ever, you can see this on YouTube. It's very awkward. She's like over the top crazy, which is appropriate.
Right.
But Michael Eisner does not know how to deal with her campiness, and is just so like, it's just, there's no chemistry whatsoever, and it's really awkward. She's wonderful as Maleficent, but he couldn't deal with it. He didn't know how to handle her perfection of being Maleficent.
He was always awkward about types of things.
But this is one of the really, really awkward times, I feel. Like, it's really funny if you go and watch it. The show went off pretty much without a hitch. They had plenty of time to rehearse it now. And it became an instant, immediate home run success. Unlike other things Disney has done that have, had rocky starts. Aside from the Rodney King thing, this went off perfectly for a change. So, it was more successful than they had even anticipated. The show averaged over 8,000 people, not per day, per performance. And it was so popular, they originally they planned to just have 2 performances a night. They had to add a 3rd performance during its first year, and it was 3 times a night, with an average of 8,000 for each of those 3 performances. I mean, it was just insane. And I believe I had gone there that summer, and I didn't want any part of it. It was a madhouse. Show. Well, yes, it was a show. A very big shoe. So, what was Fantasmic? Now that we told you how it came to be, what exactly is it, if you don't already know? The show starred Mickey Mouse, and it was an adventure through his dreams and his nightmares. And it involved all the various elements of the rivers of America. It involved the Columbia, which, for the purposes of Fantasmic, was now being dressed up as Captain Hook's galleon. And they had a staged battle on board. And they had Peter Pan and Captain Hook fighting on the scaffolding of the boat, and they put a big pirate flag on it and everything. Definite highlight of the show. It ended with the battle between Mickey and the dragon, which we talked about before. And then it ended with the Mark Twain steamboat coming around the bend, and dozens of Disney characters on board waving banners, colorful banners, and all lit up different colors. It was pretty, it was and still is pretty spectacular, you have to admit.
Yeah.
And what really just made it was what they had at their disposal. The only reason the steamboat is part of it is because it was there already. So they incorporated it into the show. So the placement of it added to its, charm. But one early hiccup, it wasn't completely perfect. There were some minor issues. And one of the early hiccups was Ursula. Unlike the dragon, which they gave up on trying to make it a full-bodied dragon and just did the head, they went forward with the full-bodied Ursula figure.
Mm-hmm.
But it was laden with technical issues from the get-go. So it was sort of a crapshoot whether or not she would function properly each night. She always rolled around the river because she was in the soundtrack. They couldn't just have her voice coming out and her music and then you saw nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So whether or not she could move or not, sometimes she just rolled out and didn't move. Other nights she was perfect. It was laden with issues. And eventually they gave up on it and they said, okay, we'll just play the music and not have her come out. And that's how it ran for several years. And people were like, I think eventually they just showed footage of the Ursula on the mist screens instead.
Yeah, that's what they do now. But I remember when they had this.
I remember her, because I saw it early on. So, yeah. So, of course, being a hit at Disneyland and generating this much buzz meant that the next stage was to bring it back to Disney World, obviously. Obvious conclusion, right? So they originally had thought, well, since it's at the Rivers of American Disneyland, we should do the same thing in Disney World. But the Rivers of America setup in Disney World is a lot different. And it's got a lot more landscaping and nooks and crannies and twists and turns, and it's not as just one line around the river like at Disneyland. So it really isn't set up to be able to implement this type of a show. So they early on, gave up on that idea. And Epcot was off the table because it already had its nighttime show. So by process of elimination, they had the new the new park had opened in 1992, the Disney MGM Studios, and there was sort of a lack of nighttime offerings. People would leave early. So by process of elimination, they decided to build it at Disney MGM Studios, now Disney Hollywood Studios. It was still MGM when this opened, so I'm going to refer to it as Disney MGM. So the next issue was, where do we put it? Because it didn't have a big lake. Like the other two parks had huge bodies of water, and MGM didn't have that. They had a body of water where the Gertie's Dinosaur Restaurant and the, where that is, but it's not
like
that
Primetime
big.
Cafe and stuff.
Yeah, it's not that big. It's really not big enough. So they decided to build a brand new arena for it. And this was going to be built right off the new Sunset Boulevard area that had just opened recently, where the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror was. And there was a spot to offshoot it from the space that was between the Tower of Terror and the Theater of the Stars, which is where they had the live Beauty and the Beast stage show. So they built this huge amphitheater. You can see it under construction here, behind those two attractions, actually outside of the berm of what had then been MGM. But they had a lot of surrounding area that had not been used, and unlike Disney, the Magic Kingdom, there really is no berm, so they can build out as far as they want. There's nothing blocking them from doing that. So the Fantasmic stage in Florida is much larger in the amount of people and space that it has at Disneyland. They already knew how successful it was going to be. So the stage area itself, instead of being frontier themed, they could now theme it however they wanted. They weren't tied to anything. So they built a giant man-made mountain over 50 feet tall. And Sorcerer Mickey could stand on this mountain. You can kind of see the idea in the billboard here.
Mm-hmm.
And the amphitheater could hold nearly 7,000 seats, with room for another 3,000 people to stand in the back. So over 10,000 people could see this at a time. And it premiered on October 15th, 1998. And it was, again, an immediate success. The show was, at that time, almost identical to the Disney show. Even the soundtrack was virtually the same, but there were a few things that were different. One thing is, they didn't have sailing ship Columbia, unless they wanted to build one, and they didn't. So they left out the Peter Pan pirate segment, and they replaced it with a different segment, which was now themed to Pocahontas. And it had Ratcliffe and kind of the discovery of America. And this came out the just 2 years after Pocahontas did, 3 years. So Pocahontas was still kind of a big thing at that point. So it makes sense that that's where they wanted to go. But as time went on, it was like, Pocahontas? Why Pocahontas? You know, kind of turned into that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that, again, no Mark Twain. So what they did was, while they didn't have a Columbia, they decided it was just so iconic to have that boat at the end that they decided that, in fact, they would build a brand new boat just for the purposes of this show. So they had a boat that was just used as scenery and for the staging, and it floated by for this show that they built specifically. And this time, instead of being an actual 18th century steamboat, it was themed to the steamboat featured in the 1928 cartoon Mickey Steamboat. If you look at it, it looks very similar to the steamboat in that cartoon. So I think they went with that because it's a lot cheaper to build than the ornate, Mark Twain type steamboat.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot more simple. And it works. It still works. And it has a Disney connection. You notice the 3 whistles on top, just like from the cartoon. So it really is, they really tried to make it look like the steamboat from Steamboat Willie. And I appreciate that. Even though they didn't build a real steamboat like the Mark Twain, they at least, attempted to tie it into something Disney, and it makes sense. So that show really remained unchanged, the one in Florida. They added some technology over time, lighting, effects were improved, but the show, the soundtrack, the things that happened during the show, nothing got changed for its entire original run until it closed in 2000, March 16th, 2020. Not 2000, 2020. But the only reason it closed was because the entirety of Walt Disney World closed. And you all know why that is, because of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
And when the park reopened, it remained closed because there was still issues with public gathering so closely together. Really, you couldn't do that yet. So they couldn't open it. So in all of this, they decided, well, as long as we have it closed, why don't we just make a new version and update it? So in 2021, they actually announced that they would be returning with Fantasmic. A lot of people were wondering if it was ever going to come back even. But they said, yes, in fact, it will be coming back. and we're going to refurbish it, and we're going to add new segments from Aladdin, Moana, and Frozen. And that was all we heard. We didn't hear exactly what that would entail, but we knew that it was going to be coming back at some point. We didn't know exactly when. So that's where we kind of leave off Disney World. Now let's go over the oceans and see what happened over in Japan, because they had a version of Fantasmic as well. And their version was at their second park called Tokyo Disney Sea. So in the middle of Tokyo Disney Sea is a huge body of water. I think it's bigger than even World Showcase in Epcot. And it's called the Mediterranean Harbor. And this is designed specifically with putting on water shows in mind. So for the first time, they actually built something with that purpose as its intention. So this is a wonderful place, I'm sure, to see water shows, because it's got plenty of viewing, and it was designed just with that in mind. Originally, they had thought of doing a Fantasmic just for Disney Sea, which opened in 2001. But eventually they went with an original concept called Disney Sea Symphony. And it had no relation to Fantasmic other than it being a water show on the water. And then at Christmas time, they started doing a Christmas time version called Candlelight Reflections. And this was had a huge hat, or if I gave it away. I gave away the punchline, Ruthie. Had a huge Christmas tree that was on a barge. Another major difference is there was no stationary staging. Everything was on floating barges, the entire show. So, in 2004, they retired the original show, and they opened a second iteration called Bravissimo, but C is capitalized, SEAC, Bravissimo. And that ran from 2004 to 2010. And at that time, in the Christmas times, they were still doing the candlelight reflections with the big Christmas tree. And that's important because in 2011, now Disney Sea finally got its own version of Fantasmic. And this show was going to incorporate the big Christmas tree, but it was going to change it into Mickey Sorcerer's hat. And this is a concept drawing of what they had planned for it. And so they repurposed the Christmas tree. They reused all the technology that had been put in for Bravissimo. But again, unlike the American versions, all of the show was on floating barges. The storyline was similar but different to the Disneyland versions. Here you can see the sorcerer hat that was originally a Christmas tree. And it had an all-new score and an original theme song and totally different scenes. The overall theme of Mickey fighting the dragon and you going into his dreams was there. But all the scenes and everything were all switched out and changed up. So in that regard, it was the same show, but same but different. So this version of Fantasmic also closed in 2020 because of COVID. Again, everything in Japan closed because of COVID. And unlike the one in Florida, this one was not going to come back because they had already planned on replacing the show already before any of this happened. And the final show was supposed to be on July 20th. Or no, the final show was supposed to be in March. But then it ended up being in February instead of March, a month earlier than it had originally been planned. But then in July, the Oriental Land Company came out and announced that Fantasmic would be replaced by an all-new nighttime spectacular. And it was going to be called Tokyo Disney Sea, Believe Sea of Dreams. And this is supposed to open in January of next year, so early next year. So not just in a few months from now. But as of right now, there's no show happening at the Disney Sea Lagoon, no nighttime show. But it's no longer going to be Fantasmic. This is a concept rendering. To me, it's like it's the same thing as Fantasmic. They're just calling it something else. I mean, it's just scenes from Disney films, which is basically what Fantasmic is.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to Anaheim, because the story isn't over in Anaheim yet. But we have to go back, because we sort of skipped ahead to cover those other two parks. So we have to go back to 2007 to continue on with the story of Disneyland's Fantasmic. So in the summer of 2007, Disney debuted a brand new sound system, along with brand new show barges, new LED lighting, and a complete overhaul of the lighting system. And the new lighting system and everything debuted in the spring of 2008. So this was sort of a, ongoing refurbishment, little by little. The three mainland lighting towers, which rise hydraulically, like I said, from the pits under the ground, they were redesigned with high-tech spotlights. The footlights on the mainland became LED. They had new pyrotechnic barges and all sorts of new things. They had new projection technology using high-def digital projectors instead of the 70mm projectors, so much crisper images being projected onto the mist screens. And this is all going to be part of a summertime 2008 promotion. Was it 2008 or 9? Yes, it was 2009, to be called Summer Night-tastic. And part of the Summer Night-tastic. So they got some of it ready 2007, 2008, and then by 2009 they were going to have everything ready for this special event. And this is a concept rendering of all the new things planned for, what was going to happen. There are some things in this picture that were not part of it, but this was an early concept. For example, Snow White is in this. She eventually would be taken out of the show, believe it or not. But, so the biggest planned upgrade was supposed to finally replace the dragon head on a crane with a full body audio animatronic figure of Maleficent, as had been planned for the original 1992 version of Fantasmic. And they now had the technology, and they were promoting it, and it was all going to be part of this whole summer of 2009 special aforementioned promotion. But everything else was ready on time, but the dragon had just technical problem after technical problem, and unfortunately the show had to continue on without it. And they continued to use the original Maleficent, the head rising on a cherry picker, instead of the dragon that they had built, which, because everyone was aware of it, and because Disney kept having to say that, we're having technical issues, they the public as a group started calling the dragon Murphy, after Murphy's Law. Because Murphy's Law is if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. So, I just realized there's a My Little Pony in the corner of this picture. I didn't notice that until just now. That was not intentional. That has nothing to do with anything. I don't know why that's even there. It's just the picture I chose, and I didn't notice it until now. So finally, they got the kinks worked out, and they got Murphy to operate by the end of the summer season. Not until September. But finally, they got him to work. Here he is. I guess it's a she, because it's Maleficent, technically. Yeah. And she's still operating successfully now, and looks great. Huge upgrade. So, since September 2009, the Dragon has been there working. Occasionally they'll have an issue, but for the most part it's been successful. Another thing that was added, because they didn't change any of the score remained completely, the storyline, everything remained completely unchanged, except for they took out the Pink Elephant segment and they changed it with a Lion King segment. And they took out Snow White and replaced her with Rapunzel. So they took out the Someday My Prince Will Come and put in, I Can See the Light instead. So another thing that was added was they had 2 jet skis disguised as Flotsam and Jetsam from Ursula's Pet, eels. This was to take the place of the missing Ursula figure. Instead of having Ursula come out during that segment, which was still in the soundtrack, they would instead have Flotsam and Jetsam come out and go past the audience. And here's a picture of one of the few times it worked. They had to kind of get rid of them too, because again, major technical difficulties. I think one time they went by too fast and splashed this huge just onslaught of water over the crowd. It was not a good thing. So, again, exact same storyline. In February of 2010, they closed the... Actually, it wasn't until much later that they put in the Lion King and Tangled. So, at this point, it was exactly the same soundtrack. The other upgrades didn't come till much later. So, scratch what I said. At this point, it was exactly the same as it had been in 1992 as far as the soundtrack and storyline. In February 2010, The Rivers of America underwent a refurbishment. Nothing about the show was changed. The second generation of the dragon broke again and partially collapsed during a performance, but it was restored to the show by November. So, in 2011, in 2016 now. We're up to 2016. The show's running as is until early 2016. And the show had to close again because now they're building Star Wars Galaxy's Edge and they're rerouting the river. So everything involving the river shut down for about a year and a half. So now they finally decided to upgrade the show with a new musical score, new scenes, some things inspired by the Tokyo Disney Sea version, and the Tokyo Disney Sea's original song that was in their version of the show called Imagination became the post-show song as the show ended. And this is when they added in, which I misspoke before, this is when they added in the new Lion King segment. They added in an Aladdin segment, and then they replaced Snow White and Prince Charming with Flynn Rider and Rapunzel. So that happened when it reopened after the 2016 closure, and it reopened in the middle of 2017. Another change, and this is probably the biggest and most controversial change, is Captain Hook's pirate ship now became Jack Sparrow's Black Pearl, and now it was themed to the Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise, as you can see in this picture. And now instead of Captain Hook and Peter Pan, it had a battle with Captain Barbossa and Jack Sparrow. Not a popular choice among Disney fans. People were hoping when it reopened this last time they would bring back the Peter Pan, but they did not do that. So on November 3rd, well, let's go back a little bit. In March of 2020, Fantasmic closed in Disneyland, again because of COVID-19. When the park reopened the following year, Fantasmic did not return because of, again, the close proximity issue. But finally, in June of this year, Fantasmic returned to Disneyland with no further changes. So the version from 2017 is exactly what you get now, as seen in this picture, with Murphy in all her glory. So, what happened to Disney World after it closed? We know what's happening in Disney Sea. They're getting a new show next year. But what about Disney World? Well, I saved this for last because this is the most recent news. So, on November 3rd, 2022, this month, Fantasmic returned to Disney Hollywood Studios after its 2-year closure. And this new and improved show has mostly all the same scenes, a new score based on the original, but it has one brand new scene, completely new, and it's even 2 minutes longer than what it replaced. They got rid of the Pocahontas scene, and they replaced it instead with a scene involving what they call Disney heroes, several different Disney heroes, which include Pocahontas, Elsa, Moana, seen pictured here, and Mulan, seen pictured here. So that was really the major change. But in addition, they got new stage scenery, updated, new costumes, new projections, lighting effects, and sound systems. Basically, they improved the technology all around for the entire show. And that is where the story of Fantasmic comes to a conclusion. Of course, I have to say that so far, in the little amount of time it's been running, the overall impression and review among guests of the new version of Fantasmic in Florida is universally being praised, and people are highly impressed, and I've really heard nothing but good things. I've heard no negativity about the new version. Quite the opposite. Which is a refreshing change for something that Disney does nowadays.
Right.
So that brings to close our 1 hour look at the history. See, this is why we put off this segment. It was like it got crazy after a while. So now you know all there is to know about Fantasmic and where it came from and what it is. So that brings to a close another exciting episode of Dateline Jiminy Crickets. Did you have fun?
Yeah, it was fun history of Fantasmic.
So Ruthie, where can everybody find Jiminy Crickets on the web?
You can find all of our past shows, including audio versions of Dateline Jiminy Crickets, on our website, jcricketpodcast.blogspot.com. You can also listen to us on Apple Podcasts under the name Jiminy Crickets, that's with an exclamation point, And be sure to leave us a 5-star review, which helps to promote the podcast. On our YouTube channel, we share updates to the Disney Chris website, including the Disneyland Magical Audio Tour, as well as past episodes of the Jiminy Crickets podcast and Dateline Jiminy Crickets. You can find our channel if you search for DisneyChris.com. And remember, .com is spelled out DOTCOM, and don't forget to subscribe and click on the notification bell. You can also join in the conversation over on our Facebook page, Jiminy Crickets Podcast, where you can not only interact with Chris and me and all the fellow Cricketeers, but you can also stay up to date on all the latest details of our many World Wide Web endeavors. On Facebook, Chris can be found under the name Chris Linden, that's Lyndon as in Lyndon Johnson, and on Twitter at DisneyChris73. If you would like to contact the show with your comments or questions, our email address is DisneyChrisDotCom@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
So I have a brand new thing I started this past September, and I'm doing a Twitch stream live every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. And since it's live, that would mean that depending on your time zone. So if you're on the West Coast, it would be at 4 p.m. Eastern on Monday nights. And I've been doing it every week without fail. I only missed 1 week when my mother was visiting. Other than that, I've been doing it every week. So be sure to check me out over at DisneyChris_audio_fun on Twitch. And if you're not able to attend the live stream, the video stays up for 1 week after the stream. So you can always go watch it after it aired live for a week following. And I do a new one every week. And we play Disney music and do Disney trivia, and we have a lot of fun. Ruthie's been, and we all have a lot of fun. On Twitch, the name of the channel is actually Disneyland. Oh no, I'm sorry. I'm like, why is this Twitch again? I'm reading this thing here. On Facebook, I have a new Twitch group just for the Twitch channel, and it's called Disneyland Audio Fun, which is actually the name of the show itself. It wouldn't let me pick Disneyland Audio Fun as my screen name for whatever reason on Twitch, but the name of the show itself is Disneyland, not Disney Chris. But if you're looking for the URL, it's Disney Chris. Does that make sense? On Instagram, I'm at DisneyChris_JC_podcast. And my website, as always, is DisneyChris.com. If you're interested in supporting us and getting free rewards in return, you can go to patreon.com/DisneyChris and set up a monthly donation. If you'd rather donate in a different way, you can just go to my website, DisneyChris.com/donate, and there's 2 other options to donate. One is to purchase from our store, where you get merchandise, and part of the proceeds go to help support us. And the other way is through, what is it, Ruthie? PayPal.
Oh, yeah.
If you would prefer not to use Patreon, you can also support us through PayPal. You can do a one-time donation, or you can do a monthly donation also on PayPal. You get the same rewards on PayPal that you get on Patreon if you do a monthly donation. Okay, so that ends the Dateline Jiminy Crickets for 2022. The year went by really fast.
Yeah.
We still have some audio shows coming up for this year. We're going to be doing a deep dive into Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's probably going to end up being a 2-part episode that will be releasing throughout December, so look for that. And we'll see you next year. And we hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and a Happy Hanukkah and a Happy Festivus for the rest of us. Whatever you celebrate, have a happy one. So, do you have any final words, Ruthie?
Sure. To quote Walt Disney, laughter is timeless, imagination has no age, dreams are forever, and happy Thanksgiving and happy holidays.
And always let your conscience be your guide.
Now it's time to say goodbye to all our company. M-I-C.
See you real soon.
K-E-Y.
Why? Because we like you.
M-O